My story dates back to the day a new neighbor moved into our quiet and peaceful street. Young man. He was about 35 years old and his name was Henry. That's how he introduced himself to me when we met. The neighbor moved into the house across the street from mine. There were about 8 of them in the neighborhood. They all lived across the street from each other. Henry didn't seem strange to me. He seemed like a very cultured and helpful person. He always greeted and helped everyone. He even had a cockatoo parrot named Captain. We met the neighbor on the first day he moved in. It was my day off. I was cooking dinner and watching something on TV when I saw a white van pull up to the neighbor's house. A fat man got out of it. He was looking around the neighborhood when he saw me come out onto the porch to ask who it was and why he was here. People rarely came here at all since we were on the outskirts of town, where even the courier services didn't get here very often. We met and shook hands. It turned out that my former neighbors had sold their house, and now Henry would be living there. He really liked the neighborhood. I offered to help unload things, but my new neighbor politely declined. Then I heard a strange voice coming from inside the car. Then Henry leaned over to the window on the passenger side and picked up his winged pet. Henry called him Captain. He told me not to be scared of the parrot. That parrot sometimes looks at him so knowingly that he gets kind of uncomfortable. After that, his expression changed. He became somehow serious and went completely into his thoughts. I did not prolong the conversation and soon said goodbye to my neighbor. That's how our acquaintance with him ended. Weeks went by. I continued to live my normal life like all the people around me. I went to work, rested at home, walked outside. Everything was normal. I didn't see my new neighbor much. On weekdays he drove his white van somewhere. Weekends were spent fixing up the house. That is, until one day I had a strange experience. It was in the evening when I got home from work and went about my usual business. I had to prepare dinner for tomorrow, a little cleaning, and have time to watch a few episodes of my favorite TV series, The Usual Bachelor's Worries. I'm standing in the kitchen preparing food. Suddenly I hear a strange sound from the entrance, as if someone tapped on the glass. I thought I was imagining it, but a moment later the tapping sound was repeated again. I decided to see who it was and found my neighbor's parrot sitting on the windowsill on the street side. The bird was looking straight into my eyes with an intelligent look, tapping its beak on the glass. It had escaped from the house. I carefully approached the parrot and stroked its head, and then I heard a cry for help from the parrot's beak, and then my smile slowly fell off my face. I quickly put Captain on the windowsill. The bird just looked at me and repeated a few creepy phrases. I stood and listened in bewilderment, not knowing how to react to it all. It was just an ordinary talking parrot. I thought for a long time how best to act and soon decided to just take the bird to the owner. I said hello to my neighbor and gave him the bird. He said he had been looking for the parrot for a long time and patted it on the head. Then, I told him how the parrot flew to my house and started talking. At first, I wanted to lie to my neighbor to avoid an awkward conversation, but then I decided to tell everything the parrot was talking about. After my words, the neighbor was silent for about 10 seconds. He thought about what to say to me. He kept smiling, but not as sincerely as before. Then the neighbor told me that he had watched a horror movie last night, and the bird had learned new words from there. Then we said goodbye. I turned around and walked back home. I was fine with Henry's explanation for his parrot's strange behavior. After all, I had witnessed his ability to repeat other people's words. But something deep inside me resisted and asked uncomfortable questions. How did it happen that out of the whole movie the parrot remembered these very phrases? Then I decided to watch the movie Henry was talking about. I rewatched the movie 3 times, but I never heard in it the phrases that the parrot was shouting. This caused me to fall into long thoughts and begin to reconsider recent events. I couldn't sleep until the morning. I thought about the fact that someone needed my help right now. What if the bird had told me something really important, and I didn't give it much thought? I came to my senses only when it was morning and the alarm clock played an annoying tune telling me that it was time to get up for work. Usually my neighbor left the house at the same time I did. But for some reason this day we missed each other. His car wasn't in the yard. Either he left early today or he just didn't want to cross paths with me. One or the other, all day at work. I felt bad. When I got home, I called 911. Should have done that earlier in the morning. The policeman thought I was crazy. What I told him was more like a prank phone call than something serious. However, they believed me, and a few minutes later, the police arrived at my neighbor's house. I watched from my kitchen window, turning off all the lights and hiding behind a curtain. The neighbor was home. He calmly opened the door and invited the police inside. A strange situation for a man who keeps his victim locked up. Still, there was something odd about his behavior, but I couldn't pinpoint what it was. I saw the cops go into the house. They stayed inside for a while, then apologized for disturbing me, and left in an unknown direction. Henry stood on the porch for a while, silently pondering something of his own. This story could have ended this way. The police checked the alleged kidnapper's house, but found nothing. Consequently, as a neighbor, I had nothing to worry about and could go on with my life. The very next day, however, another event occurred that confirmed my doubts about Henry. It happened in the evening when I came home from work again. I parked the car and a neighbor's voice came from somewhere in the back. I was not happy to see him, but after calling the emergency services I felt much calmer. I no longer felt the danger coming from this man. Henry asked me if I knew why the police had come yesterday. I lied and didn't tell him I suspected him of a crime, especially a crime as serious as kidnapping. Then the neighbor offered me a drink. I thought about it for a while, and when I heard about the six-pack, I agreed. Sometimes I wanted to sit and talk about something important. The neighbor's house was similar to mine inside and out. A big basement, 2 floors, an attic, and 5 rooms. We sat in the living room on the first floor, where he had everything ready for the fun. It was as if he knew in advance that someone was coming to see him. At first everything was normal. We drank, chatted, and generally acted like longtime buddies. But soon the first alarm went off. In an instant, a strange sound came from the second floor directly above us, as if someone had dropped something. We immediately looked at Henry, and the house was quiet for a while. The neighbor said he'd forgotten to close the upstairs window, and went to close it. I was trying to remember if the neighbor had ever told me about his family, whether he had children or a wife. It felt as if he had avoided the subject as well as any other that concerned his personal life. Not 5 minutes later, Henry came back into the living room and immediately grabbed our glasses. Mine was still full though. My neighbor decided to make a toast while he stood behind the bar with his back to me, twirling the glasses around like a bartender. I couldn't see what he was doing, but when I got my beer and happened to look inside the glass, I saw some sort of substance at the bottom that looked remotely like powder. It was unsettling. I decided to tell Henry that it was time for me to go home, and it would be great to meet at my house next time. He had a slight change in his face. First he looked at my mug, then he shifted his gaze to me, as if assessing whether I could figure out his devious plan. At that point I decided to ask him how his parrot was doing. Henry replied that it had died yesterday. I couldn't get my head around it. I was thinking about why the police couldn't find anything in the house of this outright maniac, who likes to put strange substances in people's glasses. And all that stuff about the pet being sick. He probably just strangled it, so it wouldn't talk too much. You can judge my actions any way you want. I did what I had to do, and I couldn't do it any other way. Of course I had to call the emergency services, but they wouldn't listen to me. Apparently my number had been blacklisted. I had no one to rely on, so I had to act alone. All the next day I was at home and closely followed the movements of my neighbor. Since I was supposed to be at work, I decided to hide the car in the next block, so no one would suspect anything. It wasn't until the evening, when it was late and the street was less crowded, that Henry finally left the house and drove his van to an unknown destination. This was the chance to get into the bastard's lair and try to solve his mystery for himself. Getting into the house wasn't too difficult. The garage door closed with a slight delay, and when the car was a decent distance away, I didn't hesitate to run outside. The door slammed right in my face. I had to lie down on the pavement and crawl inside. When I was finally inside, I felt uneasy. It was as if a slight fear was gripping my body. I had a feeling that I wouldn't make it, but it went away quickly. I just reminded myself that there might be people in this place who needed my help. I was sure of it, so I decided to go to the second floor and check out the very room the sounds were coming from. And you know what? There was something interesting there. The bedroom was set up as a children's room, although the neighbor didn't have children. At least he didn't talk about them. There was a bed in the center with plush toys on it. Girls' dresses and other things that could only belong to a child hung on a rack in the closet. I also noticed that all the windows were covered with bars. After what I saw, I tried to call out to anyone in the house, but all I heard in response was silence. It was too early to call the police. There was too little evidence, so I had to continue my investigation. I didn't find anything else strange on the first and second floor, but the basement became more interesting. Remember when I said my neighbor's house looked just like mine? The layout was the same, except my basement was bigger than his. That's when intuition kicked in. My attention was immediately drawn to the wall on the right. Despite the dim lighting, I could see that it was a slightly different color from the ceiling, floor, and other walls. There was also a lot more debris there, as well as old furniture that was clearly masking something. I soon made my way to an old closet and opened it. There were no items inside. Oh, and it itself looked a bit odd for such a room. Besides, if it wasn't necessary furniture, why would it have been brought here and reassembled? These thoughts made me look into the gap between the closet and the wall. There was a door leading to a secret room. It was dark and creepy, like something out of a horror movie. I quickly pushed the closet aside and pulled the handle. What I saw was forever etched in my memory. I would probably never be able to forget it. It was a torture room. There was plastic sheeting on the floor, and right in the center was a table that looked like a surgical table, with leather straps and rivets. In the far corner there was a video camera on a tripod, on which the pervert filmed all his abuse. Luckily it was unloaded, and I didn't get a chance to look at the contents. But I did get to see the pictures of the maniac's victims, which he had hung on the wall. The pictures resembled a tree, with a man unharmed at the top and the gruesome consequences of the monster's experiments at the bottom. Severed limbs and grimaces of horror, frozen on the faces of the corpses. In a dark corner next to the board was another item. It was a large glass barrel of acid. Inside it was the head of a girl with open eyes and mouth. It was clear that she was in great agony before she died. At that moment I caught myself thinking that most likely it was the words of this girl that the parrot was repeating while sitting outside my house. And what if I had decided to personally storm my neighbor's house instead of calling the police? Maybe the girl would be alive now instead of lying dead in a barrel, slowly decomposing in acid. As soon as I stepped out of the basement and headed for the exit, I immediately smelled the odor of burning. I could already see a little smoke on the first floor. I tried to go outside through the front door, but it was locked from the outside. The windows were boarded up. The flames had already engulfed the house. I was getting dizzy from the smoke. I remembered the hatch leading to the attic, where there was a small round window, the only one in the house that wasn't barred. It was the only window in the house that didn't have bars, and it was the only way I could get out and finally call for help. Good doesn't always triumph over evil. I don't know how the killer knew I was in his house. Maybe a hidden camera saw me. I'm sure the maniac had a plan B for this one. Burn down his lair to cover his tracks and destroy the witness. They did manage to put the house out, but there was hardly any evidence left. The basement was almost completely destroyed. They managed to find only fragments of the remains of that poor girl, who was later buried not far from our town. She was only 25 years old. The maniac was put on the wanted list. My neighbors and I described his appearance, but to no avail. From the police I learned another nightmare news. As a result of searches under the bed of the children's room, they found a torn notebook, somehow miraculously not burned in the fire. On it was a message for Santa Claus, written by a girl. Her name was Alice, and she'd been listed as missing in the FBI's missing persons database for 10 years.